The doors of the great hall burst open before anyone could stop them, and the entire room fell into a silence so heavy, it felt like the air itself had turned to stone. Warriors froze with their hands on their weapons. Servants dropped their trays. Even the fire in the hearth seemed to shrink back from what had just walked in. Alpha Damian Cross stood in the doorway, blood on his knuckles and fury written across every line of his face. Behind him, 2 guards dragged a struggling man across the marble floor, a man who, only an hour ago, had tried to poison the king's evening wine. Nobody in Blackwood Kingdom moved. Nobody dared. Damian did not raise his voice. He never needed to. He simply walked forward, each step echoing through the hall like the toll of a funeral bell, until he stood over the trembling traitor. "You thought I would not notice," Damian said quietly. "You thought a king who has survived 7 assassination attempts would not notice an 8th. The man on the floor begged, words tumbling out too fast to understand, promises of loyalty, excuses about debts and threats from a rival pack. Damian listened without a flicker of expression. When the man finished, the king simply turned to his general. "Take him to the border. Let the wolves of the forest decide his fate. I have no patience left tonight." The guards obeyed instantly. Nobody argued with the Alpha King. Nobody ever did. As the doors closed behind the condemned man, the court exhaled as one, though none dared show relief openly. Damian Cross was 28 years old, and in the 6 years since he had taken the throne from his father, he had never once shown mercy to anyone who threatened his kingdom. His enemies called him the Butcher King. His own people called him something else in private, something that was half admiration and half fear, the Unbreakable. He crossed the hall toward his war table, where maps of the northern territories were spread out, marked with red pins showing every skirmish along the border. His closest general, a broad-shouldered wolf named Kale, fell into step beside him. "That's the 3rd attempt this month," Kale said quietly. "Someone wants you gone badly enough to keep trying, even after failing 7 times. "Let them try," Damian said, not looking up from the map. "I have buried better men than whoever is sending these fools. You should consider taking a mate," Kale said carefully. "A queen, someone to secure the bloodline, in case I die." Damian finally looked up, and his golden eyes, sharp as a blade, cut through his general's words. "I have heard this suggestion from the council every season for the last 3 years. My answer has not changed. I do not need a mate to secure a throne I built with my own hands." Kale said nothing more. He had learned long ago that arguing with Damian Cross was like arguing with a mountain. The mountain simply did not move. What none of them knew, not Kale, not the council, not even Damian himself, was that fate had already decided otherwise. Somewhere beyond the borders of Blackwood Kingdom, in a small pack nestled between quiet hills and a river that never froze, a young woman named Lily Hart was about to change everything. Lily was nothing like the wolves of Blackwood. She stood barely to the shoulder of most warriors. With soft brown hair she kept braided out of habit rather than vanity, and hands that were more used to grinding herbs than holding weapons. She was the healer of the small Hartwell pack, trained since childhood by her grandmother, who had been the pack's healer before her. Lily had never left the boundaries of her home, never seen a battle, and certainly never imagined she would ever cross paths with a king whose name made grown warriors flinch. That was about to change. The Hartwell pack had been summoned, along with several smaller packs from the region, to a gathering at the border of Blackwood territory. It was an old tradition, one that had existed long before Damian took the throne, a meeting where smaller packs paid tribute and pledged loyalty to the ruling kingdom in exchange for protection from outside threats. Lily's father, the Beta of Hartwell, had insisted she come along this year, since their aging healer's assistant was needed to help tend to travelers who often fell ill on the long journey through the hills. Lily had not wanted to go. She had heard the same stories everyone had heard, about the ruthless king who ruled without mercy, who was rumored to have ended entire rebellions overnight. She pictured him as something almost inhuman, a monster wearing a crown, and she had no desire to stand anywhere near him. "You will likely never even see him," her father had reassured her as their small group made the 2-day journey toward the meeting grounds. "Kings do not mingle with healers. You will set up the medical tents, help anyone who needs it. and that will be the whole of your involvement." Lily had believed him. She had no reason not to. The meeting grounds were unlike anything Lily had ever seen. Dozens of pack banners fluttered in the wind, forming a colorful patchwork against the gray autumn sky. Tents stretched across the wide field in organized rows, and the scent of dozens of different packs mixed together in the air, a strange, layered smell that made her nose wrinkle at first before she grew used to it. She busied herself setting up the medical tent with her assistant, a cheerful young woman named Elena from a neighboring pack, who chattered constantly about everything from the weather to the handsome warriors walking past. Lily half listened, focused instead on organizing her herbs and bandages, grateful for something familiar to do amid so much unfamiliar noise and movement. It was late afternoon when the trouble began. A group of young warriors from a visiting pack had gotten into a scuffle near the training grounds, testing their strength the way young wolves often did, showing off before an audience of onlookers. What started as friendly sparring turned reckless, and within minutes, one of the warriors was carried into Lily's tent with a badly injured arm. Lily worked quickly, her hands steady despite the chaos around her, cleaning the wound and setting the bone with practiced efficiency. She had done this 100 times before in her own pack, though never with so many eyes watching. It was in the middle of this work that she felt it. A presence, sudden and overwhelming, like the air around her had shifted entirely. Her wolf, usually calm and quiet within her, suddenly stirred with an intensity she had never felt before, a pull so strong it made her hands pause mid-motion. She looked up instinctively, following the invisible thread that had just wrapped itself around her chest, and her eyes met a pair of golden ones across the crowded field. Alpha Damian Cross stood near the edge of the training grounds, having come to observe the sparring that had gotten out of hand. He had not expected anything unusual from this visit. Gatherings like this were routine, tedious even, a duty he performed because tradition demanded it, not because he found any enjoyment in them. Then the wind shifted, carrying a scent toward him that stopped him mid-stride. It was unlike anything he had ever smelled before, something warm and soft, like sunlight caught in flowers, and beneath it, a note that hit him somewhere deep in his chest, somewhere he did not know existed until that exact moment. His wolf, a creature that had not reacted strongly to anything in years, suddenly surged forward with a force that nearly knocked him off balance. "Mate." The word echoed through his mind, before he even understood what was happening. He turned toward the source of the scent, and found himself looking across the field at a small woman kneeling beside an injured warrior, her hands covered in someone else's blood, her brown eyes wide with sudden shock as she stared back at him. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The noise of the gathering seemed to fade into the background, replaced by a silence that existed only between the two of them, a silence charged with something neither had words for yet. Kale, standing beside his king, noticed the change immediately. He had never seen Damian Cross freeze like that, not in battle, not in the face of assassination attempts, not ever. He followed his king's gaze and found a young healer staring back with equal shock. "Sir?" Kale said carefully. Damian did not answer. He was already walking, his long strides eating up the distance between himself and the medical tent, ignoring the warriors who scrambled to get out of his way, ignoring the whispers that immediately began rippling through the crowd. The Alpha King never crossed a field with that kind of purpose, unless something had gone terribly wrong. Lily's heart pounded as she watched him approach. Every instinct told her to run, to hide, to do anything except stand there, while the most feared man in the region walked directly toward her with an expression she could not read. But her feet would not move. Something inside her, something ancient and instinctive, told her to stay exactly where she was. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. Up close, he was even more intimidating than the stories suggested, tall and broad-shouldered, with a presence that seemed to press down on the air around him. But there was something else in his expression too, something that did not match the terrifying reputation she had expected. He looked almost as stunned as she felt. "What is your name?" he asked. His voice was low, controlled, but there was something beneath it, a tightness that suggested he was holding something back. "Lily," she managed to say. "Lily Hart." He said nothing for a long moment, simply studying her face as though trying to memorize every detail. The injured warrior beside her, forgotten now by everyone including Lily, watched the exchange with wide eyes, clearly aware that something significant was happening, even if he did not fully understand what. "You do not know what just happened," Damien said finally. It was not a question. Lily shook her head slowly. She had heard stories of fated mates, of course. Every wolf had. Tales passed down through generations about the bond that connected two souls together forever. But she had always assumed such stories were mostly legend, something that happened to a fortunate few in old tales, not something that would ever touch her own quiet life. "You are my mate," Damien said, and though his voice remained steady, there was a rawness beneath the words that betrayed just how deeply this had shaken him. "My wolf recognized you the moment I caught your scent." The words hit Lily like a physical blow. Her mind raced through everything she had ever heard about the Alpha King, the executions, the wars, the reputation that made grown warriors go quiet at the mention of his name. This man, this terrifying ruler that everyone feared, was claiming to be her fated mate. She took an involuntary step back, and something flickered across his face, something that looked almost like hurt before it was quickly hidden away. "I do not understand," she whispered. "This cannot be happening." "Believe me," Damien said, "I am equally unprepared for this." Around them, the crowd had grown, whispers spreading like wildfire through the gathered packs. The Alpha King of Blackwood, feared by every soul in the region, had just claimed a small unknown healer as his mate, in front of dozens of witnesses. By nightfall, the news would reach every pack within 100 miles. Lily's father pushed through the crowd, alarm written across his face as he took in the scene, his daughter standing before the most powerful and dangerous man in the territory. He opened his mouth to say something, though what exactly he intended to say, he did not seem to know himself. Damien turned his attention to him briefly. "Your daughter is my mate," he said simply, as though this explained everything, and required no further discussion. "I intend to bring her back to Blackwood with me." "You cannot simply," Lily's father began, but the look Damien gave him silenced the protest before it could fully form. "I can," Damien said, his voice carrying the quiet certainty of a man who had never once been told no, and meant to keep it that way. "And I will." Lily felt panic rising in her chest, a tangle of fear and confusion, and something else entirely, something she could not name yet, something that pulled her toward this dangerous stranger, even as every rational thought screamed at her to run. She looked between her father's worried face and the king's unreadable golden eyes, and for the first time in her quiet, predictable life, Lily Hart had absolutely no idea what was about to happen next. The sun was beginning to set behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and deep red, and somewhere in the distance, wolves began to howl, as though the forest itself sensed that something monumental had just occurred. Lily stood frozen in the middle of the gathering grounds, staring up at the man the world called Ruthless, wondering how her entire life had changed in the span of a single afternoon, and wondering, with a shiver she could not quite explain, what exactly awaited her behind the walls of Blackwood Kingdom. Cale stepped forward carefully, sensing the tension crackling in the air between his king and the small crowd that had gathered. He had served Damien for over a decade, through wars, through betrayals, through the darkest days of his rule, and never once had he seen the man show this kind of open vulnerability. It unsettled him more than any battlefield ever had. "My king," Cale said quietly, "perhaps this conversation should continue somewhere more private." Damien did not look away from Lily. "Agreed. Have my tent prepared for a private discussion with the Hart family." The crowd slowly began to disperse. Though the whispers did not stop, they only grew quieter, spreading from person to person, like ripples across still water. Lily felt every eye that lingered on her as she was led, along with her father and a very reluctant Elena, toward the largest tent at the edge of the gathering grounds, one marked with the crest of Blackwood Kingdom. Inside, the tent was simple but well furnished, a testament to the fact that even on the road, the Alpha King traveled with a certain command of comfort. A low table sat in the center, surrounded by cushions, and Damien gestured for them to sit, though he himself remained standing, arms crossed, watching Lily with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "I understand this is overwhelming," Damien said, his voice softer now that they were away from prying eyes and ears. "I did not choose this any more than you did, but the bond is real, and it will not simply disappear because we wish it would." Lily's father, a steady man named Harold who had led the Hartwell pack for over 20 years, studied the king carefully before speaking. "My daughter has never left our lands. She is a healer, not a queen. Whatever this bond is, surely there is time to consider. There is no rushing a mate bond, but there is also no ignoring it," Damien interrupted, though not unkindly. "I have no intention of forcing your daughter into anything against her will, but I ask that she be given the chance to see Blackwood, to understand what this bond means, before any decisions are made permanent." Lily finally found her voice. "And if I say no, if I choose to stay with my pack?" Something shifted in Damien's expression, something that looked almost like pain, quickly smoothed over by the same controlled mask he wore for the rest of the world. "Then I would have to live with that," he said quietly, "though I will not pretend it would be easy." The honesty in his answer surprised her. She had expected demands, threats even, given everything she had heard about him. Instead, he stood before her offering something she had not anticipated, a choice. Elena, who had been sitting quietly beside Lily throughout the exchange, finally spoke up, her usual cheerfulness dimmed by the seriousness of the moment. "Lily, whatever you decide, I am here with you. You do not have to face this alone." Lily looked at her friend gratefully, before turning her attention back to the king, who claimed to be her fated mate. Up close, away from the chaos of the crowd, she could see things she had missed before. The faint shadows beneath his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights, the way his jaw tightened when he thought no one was watching, as though he carried burdens far heavier than any crown should require. He was not the mindless monster the stories painted him to be. He was something far more complicated, and that complexity frightened her almost as much as his reputation did. "I need time," she finally said. "This is not a decision I can make in a single evening." "Take whatever time you need," Damien replied, though the tightness in his voice betrayed how difficult those words were for him to say. Patience, she was beginning to understand, was not something that came naturally to a man used to having every command obeyed instantly. Harold cleared his throat. "We are expected to return to Hartwell within the week, once the gathering concludes." "Then I will accompany you," Damien said, surprising everyone in the tent, including, it seemed, himself. "I have matters that require my attention here for 2 more days, but after that, I will travel to Hartwell myself, to give your daughter the chance to know me before any decision is required of her." It was, Lily realized, an extraordinary offer. Kings did not travel to small, unremarkable packs for anyone, let alone spend days waiting patiently for a decision that could easily go against them. Whatever else Damien Cross was, he was not treating this bond carelessly, and despite every warning bell ringing in her mind, she found herself softening, just slightly, toward the idea that perhaps there was more to this man than the terrifying rumors suggested. As the meeting concluded and Lily walked back toward her own family's camp, beneath a sky now fully dark and scattered with stars, she could still feel the invisible thread pulling at her chest, the strange awareness of exactly where Damien stood, even though she could no longer see him. It was unsettling and, in a way she refused to fully examine, oddly comforting. She had come to this gathering expecting nothing more than a few days of tending to minor injuries among strangers. Instead, she was leaving with the weight of an impossible choice resting on her shoulders, a choice that would determine not only her own future, but, though she did not yet realize it, the future of an entire kingdom that desperately needed something the ruthless Alpha King had never allowed himself to have: hope. That night, Lily lay awake in her tent long after Elena's breathing had evened into sleep, staring up at the canvas ceiling while her mind replayed every moment of the encounter. She thought of the way the crowd had gone silent when Damien approached, the way even his own general seemed cautious around him, the countless stories of his ruthlessness that had followed her for as long as she could remember. And yet, she also thought of the quiet vulnerability in his eyes when she had stepped back from him, the careful patience he had shown despite what must have been every instinct urging him to simply claim her and be done with it. Somewhere beyond the fabric walls of her tent, she knew he was out there, likely no more capable of sleep than she was. The bond hummed steadily between them, an invisible current that refused to be ignored, and Lily understood, with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified her, that whatever choice she eventually made, her life would never again return to the simple, quiet existence she had known before this single fateful afternoon. 2 days felt like an eternity to Damien Cross, a man who had once waited 3 full years to strike back at the pack that murdered his father, patiently gathering allies and information, before finally taking his revenge in a single decisive night. Patience had never been a problem for him before, but now, every hour that passed without seeing Lily again felt like torture, a constant ache in his chest that no amount of council meetings or border reports could distract him from. Cale noticed the change immediately. His king, normally sharp and focused during strategy sessions, kept losing his train of thought, staring off toward the direction of the Hartwell camp as though he could see through canvas walls and rolling hills by sheer force of will. "You are going to wear a hole in the ground with all that pacing," Cale commented dryly during one such session, watching Damien cross the war tent for what must have been the 10th time in an hour. "I am not pacing," Damien said, though he stopped immediately upon realizing he had been doing exactly that. "Of course not, my king." Cale's tone carried the faintest hint of amusement, something few people would have dared show toward the Alpha King under normal circumstances. But Cale had earned that privilege through years of loyal service, and besides, watching the most feared man in the territory become flustered over a small healer was simply too entertaining to resist commenting on. "Careful, General," Damien warned, though there was no real heat behind it. "I mean no disrespect," Cale said, holding up his hands in mock surrender. "It is simply refreshing to see something rattle you besides border skirmishes and assassination attempts." Damien said nothing, but the truth of it settled uncomfortably in his chest. In 6 years of ruling, nothing had truly rattled him. Not the constant threats on his life, not the endless political maneuvering of rival packs, not even the death of his father, which he had processed with the same cold efficiency he applied to everything else. He had built walls around himself so thoroughly that even he sometimes forgot they were there. And then, in the span of a single afternoon, a small healer with gentle brown eyes had walked straight through every single one of them without even trying. The 2 days passed in a blur of forced patience, and when the final council meeting of the gathering concluded, Damien wasted no time gathering a small escort and setting out for Hartwell territory, leaving Cale in temporary charge of Blackwood's affairs at the border. "Do try not to start a war while I visit my mate," Damien said dryly, as he mounted his horse. "No promises," Cale replied with a grin, "but I will do my best." The journey to Hartwell took a full day, winding through hills and forest paths that grew increasingly unfamiliar the further they traveled from Blackwood's borders. Damien found himself unusually alert during the ride, his senses stretched toward the horizon as though he might catch Lily's scent from miles away. It was foolish, he knew, but the pull of the bond made rational thought difficult. Hartwell Pack's territory was smaller than he expected, a modest collection of homes built around a central square, with a river running along the eastern edge that never seemed to freeze even in the coldest months. A detail one of his guards mentioned had given the pack its old nickname among neighboring territories, the Warm River Pack. It was peaceful here, quiet in a way that Blackwood, with its constant political tension and military presence, had never been. Lily was waiting near the edge of the territory when he arrived, having sensed his approach through the bond long before his escort came into view. She stood beside her father, arms crossed, an expression on her face that was difficult to read, somewhere between wariness and something softer that she seemed determined to hide. "You actually came," she said, once he had dismounted and closed the distance between them. "I gave my word," Damien replied simply. "I do not break it." Harold stepped forward to greet the king properly, offering formal hospitality, despite the obvious tension still lingering from their conversation 2 days prior. Damien accepted graciously, following the beta toward the pack's main hall, a modest building compared to Blackwood's grand fortress, but warm and welcoming in a way that struck him unexpectedly. Word of the Alpha King's arrival spread quickly through the small pack, and by evening, curious eyes watched from every window and doorway as Damien walked through the territory, trying, in his own stiff and unpracticed way, to understand the world Lily had grown up in. You do not have to pretend to be interested in everything, Lily told him as they walked together near the riverbank later that evening, the rest of their escort keeping a respectful distance behind them. I am not pretending, Damien said, and there was something in his voice that suggested he meant it more than he expected to. I have spent my entire life inside war rooms and council chambers. I do not think I have walked beside a river simply to walk beside it in longer than I can remember. Lily glanced at him sideways, studying his profile in the fading light. He looked different here, away from the throne and the crown and the weight of a kingdom's expectations, younger somehow, though she knew he was only a few years older than her. There was a tiredness in him that had nothing to do with sleep, a weariness that came from carrying too much for too long without anyone to share the burden. Tell me about your kingdom, she said, curiosity slowly overtaking her caution. Not the version everyone whispers about. The real one. Damien was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. Blackwood is strong because it has to be. We sit between 3 larger territories, all of whom have tried, at various points, to claim our land for themselves. My father spent his reign fighting them off, and when he died, I inherited both the kingdom and the enemies that came with it.
How did he die?
Lily asked, then immediately wondered if the question was too forward. But Damien did not seem bothered by it. Poison, he said simply. A slow one, meant to look like illness. It took months before we discovered the truth, and by then, the traitor responsible had already fled to a rival pack for protection. I am sorry, Lily said softly, and she meant it. Whatever else he was, whatever violence his throne demanded of him, the loss in his voice was unmistakably real. It was a long time ago, Damien said, though the tightness in his jaw suggested the wound had never fully healed. I do not tell you this for sympathy. I tell you because you asked for the truth, and I find that I do not wish to give you anything less. They walked in silence for a while after that, the only sounds the gentle rush of the river and the distant calls of birds settling in for the night. Lily found herself stealing glances at him, trying to reconcile the stories she had grown up hearing, with the quiet, thoughtful man walking beside her now. Why me? She finally asked. Of all the wolves in this territory, why would fate choose me for someone like you? Damien stopped walking and turned to face her fully, his golden eyes catching the last light of the setting sun. I have asked myself that question every hour since I met you, he admitted. I do not have an answer. Perhaps fate simply knows what a person needs, even when that person does not know it themselves. The words settled between them, heavier than either had intended, and Lily felt her heart quicken in a way that had nothing to do with fear. She was beginning to understand, with growing unease, that resisting whatever this bond wanted from her might prove far more difficult than she had originally believed. Over the following days, Damien remained in Hartwell territory, true to his word, giving Lily the time and space to decide her own future without pressure or demand. He spoke with her father about pack matters, observed her working in the small healing house tending to minor ailments among her people, and slowly, carefully, allowed her to see glimpses of the man beneath the crown, a man who had never truly been given the chance to simply exist without the weight of a kingdom pressing down on every decision he made. It was during one such afternoon, while Lily worked in her healing house treating a child's fever, that Damien found himself standing awkwardly in the doorway, uncertain of his welcome, but unable to stay away. You can come in, Lily said, without looking up from her work. I promise the herbs will not bite. Despite himself, Damien smiled, a rare expression that transformed his face entirely, softening the harsh lines that years of ruling had carved there. He stepped inside, watching as she worked with practiced gentleness, murmuring soft reassurances to the frightened child, while mixing a remedy from dried herbs and warm water. You are good at this, he observed. It is what I was trained for, Lily said, finally glancing up at him. Unlike some people, I did not inherit a throne. I earned my place through years of learning. There was no accusation in her words, simply observation, but Damien felt the weight of it regardless. You think I did not earn mine? I think, Lily said carefully, setting down her mortar and pestle, that ruling a kingdom through fear is not the same as earning respect. But I also think there is likely more to your story than the rumors suggest, and I would rather learn the truth than judge based on whispers. It was, perhaps, the fairest thing anyone outside Blackwood had ever offered him, and Damien found himself unexpectedly grateful for it. As the child's fever began to break under Lily's careful treatment, and her gentle laughter filled the small healing house, Damien Cross realized, with a certainty that both unsettled and comforted him, that whatever fear his enemies held for him, he had none left when it came to the small, fierce healer who had somehow found her way straight to the center of his carefully guarded heart. The decision, when it finally came, did not arrive with fireworks or grand declarations. It arrived quietly, on the 7th morning of Damien's stay in Hartwell, as Lily stood by the river, watching the sunrise paint the water in shades of gold and pink, and realized that the thought of him leaving without her felt far worse than the thought of leaving her home behind. She found him near the stables, preparing, as he did every morning, for the possibility that this might be the day she asked him to leave and never return. He straightened when he saw her approaching, something cautious and hopeful warring in his expression. "I will come to Blackwood," Lily said, before he could speak. "Not as a bride yet, not as anything permanent, but I will come, and I will see if this bond is something I can build a life around." Something shifted in Damien's face, relief so profound it nearly undid the careful composure he had maintained for days. "Thank you," he said simply, though the words carried far more weight than their brevity suggested. Harold was less immediately convinced, spending a long evening speaking privately with his daughter about the enormity of what she was agreeing to, the politics of a kingdom she knew nothing about, the dangers that came with standing beside a king so many enemies wished to see fall. But in the end, he recognized what Lily herself had already accepted. The bond was real, and pretending otherwise would only cause more pain in the long run. The journey to Blackwood took a full day, Lily riding beside Damien with Elena, who had insisted on accompanying her friend into this uncertain new life, following close behind with the rest of the escort. As the miles passed, Lily watched the landscape shift from the gentle hills of her homeland into something harsher, more mountainous, the trees growing taller and darker, until finally, in the late afternoon light, the walls of Blackwood Kingdom rose into view. The fortress was massive, built from dark stone that seemed to absorb the fading sunlight rather than reflect it, its towers stretching toward a sky that had grown increasingly gray as they approached. Guards lined the entrance, straightening to attention as their king approached, though Lily noticed the way their eyes widened slightly when they caught sight of her riding beside him. "They are not used to seeing me bring anyone home," Damien said quietly, noticing her nervousness. "You will be the subject of considerable curiosity for a while." "Wonderful," Lily muttered, though there was a hint of humor beneath the sarcasm that made Damien's lips twitch upward. The great hall, when they entered it, was already filling with members of the court, word having spread quickly through the fortress that their king was returning with his newly discovered mate. Lily felt the weight of dozens of eyes settling on her, assessing, judging, whispering behind hands that did little to actually hide the words being exchanged. "She looks so small," someone murmured, not quite quietly enough. "Hardly queen material," another voice added, and Lily felt her cheeks flush with a mixture of embarrassment and rising irritation. Damien's expression darkened, his gaze sweeping across the assembled court with a warning sharp enough to silence the whispers instantly. "This is Lily Hart," he announced, his voice carrying easily through the now silent hall. "My mate. She will be treated with the same respect afforded to me, and anyone who fails to understand that will answer to me personally." The silence that followed was absolute. Lily had never seen such immediate, complete obedience, and despite herself, she felt a flicker of something like awe at the sheer power Damien commanded with nothing more than his words. An older woman stepped forward from the crowd, her expression carefully neutral, though her eyes held a sharpness that suggested careful evaluation. "Welcome to Blackwood, Lily Hart. I am Margaret, head of the household staff. I will show you to your chambers." Lily glanced at Damien, uncertain, and he offered a small nod of reassurance. "Go with Margaret. I have matters that require my attention, but I will find you before evening meal." The chambers Margaret led her to were larger than Lily's entire home back in Hartwell, filled with furniture so ornate it seemed almost wasteful for a single person to occupy such space alone. Elena, walking beside her, let out a low whistle of appreciation that Lily could not quite share, still too overwhelmed by the sheer scale of everything around her. "This is a lot," Lily admitted once Margaret had left them alone to settle in. "This is incredible," Elena corrected, already exploring the room with obvious delight. "Lily, you are going to be a queen." "I am going to be exhausted," Lily muttered, sinking onto the edge of an enormous bed that felt entirely too soft compared to the simple straw mattress she had slept on her entire life. "Did you see the way they looked at me? Like I was something to be measured and found lacking." "They do not know you yet," Elena said, sitting down beside her friend. "Give them time. You will win them over the same way you win everyone over, by simply being yourself." Lily appreciated the encouragement, though privately she wondered if being herself would be enough in a place like this. A place built on power and fear and political maneuvering she barely understood. She had grown up in a small pack where everyone knew everyone else's business, where kindness and hard work were valued above titles and bloodlines. Blackwood, she was quickly realizing, operated by an entirely different set of rules. That evening, as promised, Damien arrived to escort her to the dining hall for the evening meal, an event that, according to Margaret, the entire court would be attending, specifically to observe the king's new mate. Lily had changed into one of the few formal dresses she had brought from home, feeling distinctly out of place among the elaborate fashions she had glimpsed on the court members earlier that day. "You look beautiful," Damien said as she opened the door to greet him, and the sincerity in his voice eased some of her nervousness, though not all of it. "I feel like I am about to walk into battle," Lily admitted as they made their way through the fortress's stone corridors. "In many ways, you are," Damien replied honestly. "Court politics can be more dangerous than an actual battlefield, in their own way. But I will be beside you the entire time." The dining hall was even more intimidating than the Great Hall had been, filled with long tables occupied by nobles, advisors, and high-ranking warriors, all of whom turned to watch as Damien led Lily to the head table. Kale, seated near the king's usual place, offered Lily a warm, genuine smile that provided a small measure of comfort amid the sea of unfamiliar and often unwelcoming faces. "Lily Hart," Kale said as she took her seat, "it is good to finally meet the woman who has our king so thoroughly rattled." "Kale," Damien said warningly, though there was no real heat behind it. "I am simply being honest, my king," Kale replied with a grin, and Lily found herself smiling despite the tension of the evening, grateful for at least one friendly face among the court. The meal proceeded with careful, watchful courtesy, nobles asking pointed questions disguised as polite conversation, testing Lily's knowledge of politics, her family background, her suitability for a role she had never sought or expected. She answered as honestly as she could, refusing to pretend to knowledge she did not have, and though some of the court members exchanged skeptical glances, others seemed genuinely intrigued by her straightforward, unguarded manner. It was near the end of the meal when the first true test of the evening arrived, in the form of a tall, elegant woman who approached the head table with a confidence that suggested she was well accustomed to commanding attention. "Lady Vivian," Damien said, his tone noticeably cooler than it had been throughout the rest of the meal. "I was not aware you had returned to court. I heard the most fascinating news while traveling," Vivian said, her eyes sweeping over Lily with an assessment that felt considerably less kind than anything else Lily had endured that evening. That our king had finally found his mate, and in such an unexpected place. "A healer, I am told. How charmingly humble." The condescension in her voice was unmistakable, and Lily felt her temper, usually well controlled, begin to simmer beneath the surface. She had endured curious stares and whispered doubts throughout the day, but there was something particularly grating about Vivienne's deliberate, performative dismissal. "I am a healer, yes," Lily said evenly, meeting the other woman's gaze directly. "Trained by my grandmother, who was trained by hers before that. I have saved more lives with my hands than most people in this hall have likely ever witnessed being lost." The hall went quiet at the sharpness in Lily's tone, and Vivian's carefully composed expression flickered with surprise before smoothing back into practiced elegance. "How admirable," she said, though the words carried little warmth. "I simply wonder if such humble beginnings prepare one adequately for the demands of a throne." "I suppose," Lily replied, her voice steady despite the anger building inside her. "We will find out together, will we not?" Damien, who had been watching the exchange with an unreadable expression, finally spoke, his voice carrying an edge that made several nearby nobles straighten in their seats. "Lady Vivian, I believe you have made your welcome sufficiently clear. Perhaps you would care to find your seat before this conversation continues further." It was not quite a command, but it was close enough that Vivian had little choice but to comply, offering a shallow bow before retreating with as much dignity as she could manage. Lily watched her go, her heart still pounding with residual anger, unaware that she had just passed, without realizing it, her first true test in the eyes of Blackwood's court. "You handled that well," Damien said quietly, once Vivian was out of earshot. "I was one more comment away from losing my temper entirely," Lily admitted, some of the tension draining from her shoulders now that the confrontation had passed. "For what it is worth," Damien said, a hint of something warm entering his voice, "I found your temper rather impressive." Lily glanced at him, surprised by the admission, and found him watching her with an expression she was beginning to recognize, something between admiration and a kind of helpless fondness that seemed entirely at odds with the ruthless reputation that had preceded him. She did not yet understand just how rare and precious that expression truly was, how few people had ever seen the Alpha King look at anything, or anyone, quite that way. As the evening drew to a close and the court slowly dispersed, whispers following Lily's every movement, she found herself reflecting on the strange, overwhelming day, uncertain of what her future in this cold, beautiful fortress would hold, but increasingly certain that whatever challenges awaited her, she would not be facing them entirely alone. The days that followed settled into an uneasy rhythm as Lily slowly adjusted to life within Blackwood's towering walls. Mornings were spent exploring the fortress under Margaret's careful guidance, learning the layout of a building so vast it made her childhood home feel like a single room in comparison. Afternoons often found her in the small healing house near the eastern wing, where she had quickly discovered the fortress physician, an elderly wolf named Edmund, and struck up an easy friendship built on shared knowledge of herbs and remedies. It was in the healing house, 3 weeks into her stay, that Lily first witnessed something that would set the tone for the growing tension between herself and Blackwood's darker traditions. A young servant girl, no older than 15, was brought in by 2 guards, her arm bruised and her eyes downcast in a way that immediately set Lily's protective instincts alight. Edmund moved to examine her while Lily gathered supplies, but her attention was fixed on the guards, who stood nearby discussing the situation, with a casualness that made her blood run cold. "She dropped a tray near the council chamber," one guard was saying, startled Lord Bennet during an important discussion. He was well within his rights to discipline her. Lily's hands stilled over the bandages she had been preparing. Discipline her? By breaking her arm? The guards turned, seemingly surprised that anyone would question the explanation, let alone the small healer who had only recently arrived at court. "It is how things are done here," the second guard said, not unkindly, but with the weary acceptance of someone who had long ago stopped questioning the established order. "Servants who cause disruptions are dealt with according to the noble's discretion." Lily felt something hot and furious rising in her chest as she looked at the frightened girl, who flinched at every raised voice, clearly accustomed to far worse treatment than a single broken arm. She finished treating the injury with gentle, careful hands, murmuring reassurances the entire time, but her mind was already turning toward the confrontation she knew was coming. She found Damien later that evening in his study, poring over reports from the northern border, and the moment he looked up and saw her expression, he set his papers aside entirely. "Something has upset you," he said, rising from his desk. "A servant girl had her arm broken today," Lily said, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. "By a nobleman, because she startled him during a meeting. And when I asked about it, I was told this is simply how things are done here." Damien's jaw tightened, though whether from the injury itself or the accusation implicit in Lily's tone, she could not immediately tell. "Lord Bennet has always been quick-tempered," he said carefully. "I will speak with him about restraint." "Restraint?" Lily's voice rose slightly, disbelief coloring her words. "A child was hurt, badly enough to need treatment, over something as trivial as a dropped tray, and your response is to ask for restraint?" What would you have me do? Damien asked, and though his voice remained level, Lily could sense the tension building beneath his composed exterior. Lord Bennett commands significant loyalty among the Western territories. I cannot simply strip a powerful noble of his, standing over a servant's injury, without risking political consequences that could destabilize the entire kingdom. So her pain is simply the cost of your political convenience, Lily said, the words coming out sharper than she intended, though she made no move to soften them. Something flickered across Damien's face, a mixture of frustration and something that looked almost like shame, though he quickly masked it. You do not understand the complexities of ruling a kingdom like this. Every decision carries consequences far beyond what you can see. Then explain it to me, Lily said, crossing her arms. Make me understand why a child's broken arm is an acceptable price for political stability. For a long moment, Damien said nothing, and Lily watched as something in his expression shifted, a crack forming in the carefully controlled mask he wore for the rest of the world. I do not enjoy the compromises this throne requires, he finally admitted, his voice quieter than she had ever heard it. But I learned, early in my rule, that trying to change everything at once nearly cost me the kingdom entirely. I have to choose my battles carefully. Then choose this one, Lily said, softening slightly at the genuine conflict she saw in him, though her resolve did not waver. Please, this is not a battle about political strategy. This is about basic decency. Damien studied her for a long moment, something in his expression that Lily could not quite name, before finally nodding. I will speak with Lord Bennett myself, tomorrow. And I will make it clear that such treatment of servants will not be tolerated going forward. It was not everything Lily wanted, not immediately, but it was a genuine concession, and she recognized the effort it had cost him to make it. Thank you, she said, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. You are remarkably persuasive when you are angry, Damien observed, a faint hint of wonder in his voice that made Lily glance up at him curiously. Is that a complaint? She asked. No, he said, and something in his tone made her breath catch slightly. It is the opposite of a complaint entirely. True to his word, Damien confronted Lord Bennett the following day, and word of the encounter spread quickly through the fortress, embellished with each retelling, until it became something of a legend among the staff. The Alpha King, it was said, had been so furious on behalf of his small mate that Lord Bennett had gone pale and stammered through an apology, promising never again to lay a hand on any servant under his authority. The story reached Lily by way of Elena, who relayed it with obvious delight, while helping Lily prepare for another evening court function. They are saying you have him wrapped entirely around your finger, Elena said, grinning. The servants have started calling you the Gentle Storm. That is a ridiculous nickname, Lily said, though she could not entirely hide her smile. It suits you, Elena insisted. You look so soft and unassuming, and then you unleash a temper that apparently makes even the Alpha King back down. Lily thought about that observation later, as she made her way toward the library where she had taken to spending her evenings when court duties allowed, and found herself considering, for the first time, the strange power she seemed to hold within this intimidating fortress. She was not a warrior. She held no political rank beyond her uncertain status as the king's mate. And yet, somehow, her anger, her insistence on basic kindness and decency, seemed to carry more weight than she had ever anticipated. She found Damien in the library as well, seated near the fireplace with a book he did not appear to be reading, his attention fixed instead on the flickering flames. He looked up as she entered, and something in his expression softened immediately, the tension of the day's political maneuvering visibly easing from his shoulders. I heard you gave Lord Bennett quite a fright, Lily said, settling into the chair across from him. He deserved considerably more than a fright, Damien replied, though there was less anger in his voice now, replaced by something that sounded almost like weary relief that the confrontation had passed. But I have made my expectations clear. Servants under Blackwood's roof will be treated with basic respect going forward, regardless of noble status. That is a significant change, Lily said carefully. It is one I should have made years ago, Damien admitted. I built walls around this kingdom to protect it from outside threats. But somewhere along the way, I forgot to examine what was happening within those walls. You have made me realize that a kingdom's strength is not only measured by how well it withstands enemies, but by how well it treats its own people. Lily felt something warm settle in her chest at his words, a growing recognition that the man before her, despite every terrifying rumor she had heard before ever meeting him, possessed a genuine desire to be better than the reputation that preceded him. It was not that he was without flaws, without the harsh pragmatism that ruling demanded, but he was willing to listen, willing to change when confronted with injustice, and that willingness meant more to Lily than any grand gesture could have. "You know," she said, a teasing note entering her voice for the first time since arriving at Blackwood, "everyone in this fortress seems terrified of you except me." "I have noticed," Damien said dryly. "It is a rather humbling experience, being the only person in an entire kingdom who cannot seem to intimidate his own mate." "Would you want me to be intimidated?" Lily asked, genuinely curious. Damien considered the question seriously, his golden eyes reflecting the firelight as he studied her. "No," he finally said. "I spent years surrounded by people too frightened to tell me the truth, too afraid of consequences to challenge my decisions even when those decisions were wrong. You are the only person who speaks to me honestly, without fear clouding your judgment. I find that I value it more than I ever expected to." The admission hung between them, quiet and sincere, and Lily felt the growing pull of the bond settle more comfortably into her chest, no longer quite the frightening, overwhelming force it had been during their first meeting, but something steadier, warmer, something that felt increasingly like the foundation of a life she had never expected to want, but was slowly beginning to embrace. Outside, the wind picked up against the fortress walls, carrying with it the first true chill of the approaching winter. But within the library, beside the crackling fire, Lily Hart found herself feeling, for the first time since arriving in Blackwood, something dangerously close to belonging. Not everyone within Blackwood's walls celebrated the growing bond between their king and his small, outspoken mate. In a shadowed corner of the fortress, far from the warmth of the library fire, Lady Vivian sat across from a man whose presence at court had grown increasingly frequent in recent weeks. A visiting lord from a neighboring territory named Callum Ashford. "She has him completely distracted," Vivian said, swirling wine in her glass with barely contained irritation. "The great Alpha King, brought to heel by a healer with no political standing whatsoever. It would be almost amusing if it were not so dangerous for the rest of us." "Dangerous how?" Callum asked, leaning forward with interest that extended beyond simple curiosity. "Damien has always ruled through absolute control," Vivian explained. "Every decision calculated, every emotion buried beneath duty. This bond has cracked that control wide open. He is soft now, distracted, willing to overturn years of established order because his little mate disapproves of how servants are disciplined." She said the last part with obvious disdain, having lost considerable standing herself when several of her own household practices had come under scrutiny following the Bennett incident. Callum's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "A distracted king is a vulnerable king," he said slowly. "And a vulnerable king with an obvious weakness is an opportunity that should not be wasted." "What are you suggesting?" Vivian asked, though the calculating gleam in her own eyes suggested she already had a fairly good idea. "I am suggesting," Callum said, "that if the girl were to disappear, or better yet, if harm were to befall her in a way that could be traced back to enemies of Blackwood, rather than to us, the resulting chaos could create considerable opportunity. A grieving, enraged king makes mistakes. A king consumed by vengeance is far easier to manipulate than one operating with cold, calculated control." Vivian considered this carefully. She held no particular loyalty to any rival kingdom, but her own ambitions within Blackwood's court had been steadily crumbling since Lily's arrival, and the idea of reclaiming her former influence held considerable appeal. "And what would you gain from such chaos?" "My territory has long chafed under Blackwood's dominance in this region," Callum said. "A destabilized kingdom, distracted by grief and vengeance, would create opportunities for territorial adjustments that have been denied to us for generations." It was treason, plain and clear, and both of them understood the danger of what they were discussing. But ambition, Vivian had long ago learned, often outweighed caution among those hungry enough for power. "I want no direct involvement," Vivian said finally. But I could, perhaps, provide information. The girl's habits, her schedule, the places she frequents when unguarded. Callum smiled, an expression that held little warmth. That would be most helpful. Unaware of the dangerous conversation unfolding within her own walls, Lily continued settling into her new life at Blackwood over the following weeks, gradually earning the cautious respect of the court through a combination of genuine kindness and an increasingly well-known unwillingness to tolerate injustice. The servants had grown fond of her, several confiding that her arrival had brought noticeable changes to how they were treated throughout the fortress. Even some of the more skeptical nobles had begun to soften their initial judgments, impressed by her straightforward honesty and evident dedication to her healing work. Damien, for his part, found himself increasingly reluctant to spend time away from her presence, a fact that had not gone unnoticed by Cale, who took considerable amusement in watching his king rearrange council meetings and border inspections around Lily's schedule whenever possible. "You used to complain that court gatherings were a waste of valuable time," Cale observed one afternoon as they reviewed border reports together. "Now you attend every single one, simply because your mate might be present." "I attend because it is my duty as king," Damien replied, though the slight flush creeping up his neck rather undermined the claim. "Of course," Cale said, grinning. "Purely duty. Nothing to do with the way your entire demeanor changes the moment she enters a room." Damien chose not to dignify this observation with a response, though privately he acknowledged the truth of it. Lily had become, in the span of a few short weeks, essential to his daily existence, in a way he had never anticipated needing anyone to be. Her presence eased burdens he had carried alone for years. Her willingness to challenge him when he faltered kept him honest, in ways his advisors, too accustomed to fearful compliance, never had. It was during a routine visit to the Eastern Market District, a monthly tradition, where Lily had begun accompanying local healers to distribute remedies among the fortress's surrounding villages, that the first sign of danger emerged. Lily had grown comfortable enough with her escort of 2 guards that she occasionally wandered slightly ahead while examining herbs at a market stall, a habit that had not yet caused concern given the relative safety of Blackwood's central districts. On this particular afternoon, however, as she knelt to examine a basket of dried lavender, a hooded figure brushed past her with deliberate carelessness, murmuring something too quiet for her guards to overhear. "Your king's enemies have long memories," the figure said, low and threatening. "Enjoy your borrowed time, little healer." Lily spun around, heart pounding, but the figure had already melted into the crowd, leaving no trace beyond the chilling words that echoed in her mind. She reported the incident immediately to her guards, who escorted her back to the fortress with heightened alertness, and by evening, the encounter had reached Damien's ears, transforming his expression into something dark and dangerous that Lily had not witnessed since their very first meeting, when he had dragged a traitor across the great hall floor. "Describe exactly what was said," Damien demanded, his voice tight with barely controlled fury as he paced his study, Cale standing nearby with equal tension in his posture. Lily recounted the encounter as precisely as she could remember, watching as Damien's jaw clenched tighter with every word. "This changes your security arrangements immediately," he said once she finished. "You will not leave the fortress without a full escort going forward, and I want the market district investigated thoroughly." "Damien," Lily said carefully, recognizing the barely restrained violence simmering beneath his controlled exterior. It may have simply been an isolated threat, someone testing boundaries. Or it may have been the first move in something far more dangerous, Damien countered, stopping his pacing to look directly at her, and Lily saw, beneath the anger, genuine fear, the first time she had witnessed that particular emotion cross his face since they had met. "I have enemies who would gladly use you against me, Lily. I will not risk your safety on the assumption that this was merely an idle threat." Cale cleared his throat carefully. "I will increase patrols throughout the market district and begin investigating any recent arrivals to the territory who might have connections to our known rivals." Damien nodded, though the tension in his shoulders did not ease. Once Cale had departed to begin the investigation, he crossed the room to stand directly before Lily, his hands settling gently on her shoulders, as though needing physical confirmation that she remained safe and unharmed. "I cannot lose you," he said quietly, and the raw vulnerability in his voice struck Lily deeply, a stark contrast to the controlled, powerful ruler the rest of the kingdom knew. I spent 6 years believing I needed nothing beyond duty and strategy to sustain me. Then you arrived, and I discovered exactly how much I have to lose. Lily reached up, covering his hands with her own, offering what comfort she could despite the fear now coiling in her own stomach. I am not going anywhere, she said, though even as she spoke the words, a small, uneasy voice in the back of her mind wondered whether that promise would prove easier made than kept. Outside, the market district buzzed with its usual evening activity, unaware of the dangerous conversation that had taken place hours earlier, unaware that somewhere within the shadows of a neighboring territory, plans were already being set into motion that would soon threaten not only Lily's safety, but the very foundation of the fragile peace Blackwood had maintained for years. Security around Lily tightened considerably in the days following the market incident, a change she found simultaneously reassuring and stifling. Where she had once wandered relatively freely between the healing house, the library, and the fortress gardens, she now found herself accompanied everywhere by no fewer than 3 guards, a level of protection that made even the simplest tasks feel like carefully coordinated military operations. I cannot even visit the herb garden without an armed escort, Lily complained to Elena one afternoon, watching from her window as guards patrolled the courtyard below with heightened vigilance. I understand the danger, truly I do, but this is becoming exhausting. Better exhausted than in danger, Elena replied practically, though her own expression carried traces of the same restlessness Lily felt. The entire fortress had grown tense since the incident, the easy warmth that had begun developing between Lily and the court members, giving way to a watchful caution that permeated every interaction. Cale's investigation into the market district had turned up frustratingly little in the following 2 weeks, the hooded figure having vanished without leaving any useful trail, and the lack of concrete answers only deepened Damien's simmering anxiety. He had thrown himself into strengthening Blackwood's defenses with an intensity that left little time for anything beyond security briefings and strategic planning, and Lily found herself missing the quiet evenings they had once shared in the library, evenings that had grown increasingly rare as the weight of potential threats consumed his attention. It was during one such evening, when Damien returned late from yet another lengthy security meeting, to find Lily waiting in his study, with an expression that suggested she had been waiting for some time, that the tension finally boiled over into open conflict. "You missed dinner again," Lily said, her voice carrying an edge that had been building for days, for the 4th time this week. "I was reviewing border patrol schedules," Damien said tiredly, rubbing at his eyes as he crossed toward his desk. "This is not a convenient time for distractions, Lily." The word landed harder than he perhaps intended, and Lily felt something sharp twist in her chest. "A distraction," she repeated, standing from her chair with barely contained frustration. "Is that what I have become to you? Something to be managed around your more important responsibilities?" "That is not what I meant," Damien said, though the exhaustion in his voice made the correction sound less convincing than he likely intended. "Then what did you mean?" Lily pressed, crossing her arms as her temper, usually so carefully measured, finally broke free of its restraints. "Because from where I am standing, you have spent 2 weeks treating me like a problem to be solved, rather than a person to be spoken with. I understand the danger, Damien. I understand that someone threatened me, and that frightens you. But locking me behind 3 guards and disappearing into endless strategy meetings is not protection. It is avoidance." Damien's expression tightened, something defensive flaring in his golden eyes. "Would you prefer I ignore the threat entirely? Leave you vulnerable while I attend to more pleasant matters?" "I would prefer," Lily said, her voice rising with genuine anger now, "that you talk to me instead of shutting me out. I am not a piece of property to be secured and forgotten in a vault, Damien. I am your mate. If something is threatening me, threatening us, I deserve to be part of the conversation, not simply informed of decisions made entirely without my input." The silence that followed was heavy, charged with the particular tension that comes from 2 people who care deeply for each other, colliding over genuine, unresolved fear. Damien stood frozen for a long moment, and Lily watched something complicated pass across his face, anger giving way slowly to something closer to helpless frustration. I do not know how to do this, he finally admitted, his voice quieter now, stripped of its earlier defensiveness. I have spent my entire life solving problems through strength and strategy. I do not know how to protect someone I love without controlling every variable I can possibly manage. The word love hung in the air between them, spoken almost accidentally in the heat of the moment, and both of them seemed to register its weight simultaneously. It was the first time either of them had voiced the word aloud, though the sentiment had clearly been building beneath the surface of their growing bond for weeks. Lily felt her anger soften, though it did not entirely disappear. I understand that you are frightened, she said, moving closer to him. I am frightened too, but we cannot build whatever this is between us on secrecy and control. If you shut me out every time something difficult arises, we will never truly be partners, Damien. We will simply be a king and his carefully managed possession. You are not a possession, Damien said firmly, closing the remaining distance between them. You are the only thing in this entire kingdom that has ever felt genuinely mine, not because I claimed it through conquest or inheritance, but because you chose to be here, despite everything you had heard about me before we met. Then trust me enough to include me, Lily said softly. Let me help carry this burden instead of watching you carry it alone. Damien was quiet for a long moment, visibly wrestling with instincts built over years of solitary rule, before finally nodding. Kale believes the threat may be connected to Lord Ashford's territory, he said, the words clearly costing him considerable effort to share. There have been unusual movements along that border in recent weeks, and Ashford himself has spent an unusual amount of time at court recently, cultivating relationships that seem, in hindsight, somewhat calculated. Lily absorbed this information carefully, grateful despite the alarming content that Damien had finally chosen to include her, rather than continuing to shield her from the details of the investigation. What can I do to help? For now, simply continue being cautious, Damien said, though his tone carried none of the earlier dismissiveness. But I promise, going forward, I will not shut you out of decisions that affect your own safety. It was not a complete resolution, not yet. But it was a genuine step forward, and Lily felt the tension in her chest ease slightly, as Damien pulled her into an embrace that spoke more clearly than any words could, of the depth of feeling neither of them had fully articulated until tonight. I do love you, Damien said quietly into her hair, the admission clearly still unfamiliar on his tongue, but no less sincere for its novelty. I did not expect to, and I certainly did not know how to say it, but it is true regardless. Lily felt tears prick at her eyes, unexpected emotion welling up in response to the vulnerability he had finally allowed her to see. I love you too, she admitted, surprising herself with how easily the words came once she allowed herself to voice them. Even when you are impossible, and shut yourself away behind strategy reports for entire weeks at a time. Despite the seriousness of the evening, Damien's lips twitched upward at her teasing observation. I will try to be less impossible, he promised. See that you do, Lily said, though the warmth in her voice softened any real bite from the words. As they stood together in the quiet study, the weight of the looming threat still present, but somehow more manageable now that honesty had been restored between them, neither of them could have known just how quickly that fragile peace would once again be tested, or how the calculated plans set into motion weeks earlier by Callum Ashford and Lady Vivian were about to shift from quiet whispers and distant threats into something far more immediate and dangerous. The Autumn Festival arrived 3 weeks later, an annual tradition throughout Blackwood territory that brought together the fortress and its surrounding villages for a celebration of the harvest season. Despite the lingering security concerns, Damien had reluctantly agreed to Lily's request that the festival proceed as normal, understanding that canceling such a beloved tradition would only fuel further unrest among a population already growing anxious over increased patrols and heightened tensions. We will simply increase security discreetly, Kale had suggested during the planning discussions, rather than announcing to every potential threat exactly how nervous we have become. Lily had thrown herself into festival preparations with genuine enthusiasm, grateful for the distraction from weeks of tension, organizing healing stations throughout the festival grounds, and coordinating with local villagers on traditional harvest remedies that had been passed down through generations. It was the first time since arriving at Blackwood that she felt truly useful in a way that connected to her own identity, rather than simply her role as the king's mate. The festival grounds, set within a large meadow just outside the fortress walls, transformed over the course of a single day into a sprawling celebration of color and activity. Vendors sold seasonal goods from brightly decorated stalls, children ran between game booths with delighted shrieks, and the scent of roasted vegetables and spiced cider filled the crisp autumn air. Lily moved through the festival with genuine joy, greeting villagers she had come to know during her market visits, treating minor scrapes and complaints at her healing station with the same careful attention she had always given her patients back in Hartwell. Damien remained close by throughout the day, though he allowed her considerably more freedom of movement than he had over the preceding weeks, a concession that Lily recognized and appreciated as a genuine effort on his part. It was in the late afternoon, as the festival reached its peak attendance, and the golden autumn light began to slant across the meadow, that Lily noticed Elena had wandered further than usual toward the edge of the festival grounds, near a small copse of trees that marked the boundary between the celebration and the surrounding forest. "I will just be a moment," Lily told her nearest guard, noticing Elena's distant figure and moving to catch up with her friend before she wandered too far from the protected festival area. The guard, distracted momentarily by a commotion at a nearby game booth, did not immediately follow. As Lily approached the tree line, she called out to Elena, but her friend did not respond, remaining oddly still with her back turned. A prickle of unease crept up Lily's spine as she drew closer, the festival noise growing muffled behind her. "Elena?" she called again, and this time, her friend turned, revealing an expression of pure terror and a man standing directly behind her, one arm wrapped tightly around Elena's throat. "Come any closer and I break her neck," the man said, his voice cold and calculating, and Lily recognized, with a jolt of horror, features that matched descriptions Cale had shared during the investigation, a hired mercenary, connected to territories beyond Blackwood's borders. Lily froze, her heart pounding as she assessed the situation, aware that screaming for help might provoke immediate violence against her terrified friend. "Let her go," Lily said, forcing her voice to remain steady despite the fear coursing through her. "Whatever you want, hurting her will not help you get it." "Clever girl," the man said, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "You are correct. She is not who I actually need." His eyes fixed on Lily with predatory focus. "It is you who is coming with me." Before Lily could react, two more figures emerged from the shadows of the trees, moving quickly to restrain her, before she could call for help or attempt to flee. She fought against their grip instinctively, years of quiet, peaceful living having done little to prepare her for actual physical combat. But her struggles proved futile against trained mercenaries. "Let Elena go," Lily demanded again, even as a cloth soaked in something sharp and bitter-smelling was pressed against her face, her vision beginning to blur almost immediately. "That was never part of the arrangement," the lead mercenary said, though as her consciousness began slipping away, Lily heard him give a curt order to release Elena regardless, apparently unwilling to complicate their primary objective with an unnecessary additional hostage. The last thing Lily registered before darkness claimed her entirely was Elena's terrified scream echoing across the festival meadow, a sound that would, within minutes, alert the entire security detail to the fact that their king's mate had just been taken directly from beneath their protection. Damien was speaking with a local village elder near the main festival pavilion when Elena's scream cut through the celebratory noise, and something in his chest seized with instinctive primal terror even before he fully processed what was happening. He turned toward the sound, his wolf surging forward with an intensity that nearly overwhelmed his human control, and began sprinting toward the tree line, where a growing crowd had already gathered around a sobbing, hysterical Elena. "They took her," Elena managed to gasp out as Damien reached her, guards converging from every direction now, the festival's joyful atmosphere collapsing instantly into chaos and alarm. "3 men, they took Lily. I could not stop them. I am so sorry." Damien barely heard the rest of her apology, his entire focus narrowing to a single, devastating reality. Lily was gone, taken by enemies who had clearly been planning this moment for weeks, and every second that passed carried her further from his protection. "Which direction?" he demanded. his voice a low, dangerous growl that carried none of the controlled authority his court was accustomed to hearing, replaced instead by something far more primal and terrifying. Elena pointed a trembling hand toward the forest beyond the festival grounds, and Damien was moving before she had even fully lowered her arm, his wolf tearing free of human restraint entirely as he shifted mid-stride, a massive black form crashing through the tree line, with a speed that left even his most experienced guards struggling to keep pace. Kale, arriving at the scene moments later, took immediate command of the chaos, dispatching search parties in every direction, while simultaneously sending riders back to the fortress to secure the walls against any possibility of a coordinated secondary attack. Full mobilization, he ordered, his own fear for Lily's safety tempered by years of military discipline that Damien, in this moment, had entirely abandoned. I want every available warrior searching that forest within the hour. As search parties fanned out across Blackwood's surrounding territory, following Damien's furious trail deeper into the darkening woods, the true scope of the danger Lily now faced began to unfold. The mercenaries who had taken her were skilled, well-organized, and clearly working under instructions from someone with detailed knowledge of Blackwood's security patterns, someone who had known exactly when and where to strike for maximum effect and minimum resistance. Deep within the forest, in a hidden camp several miles from the festival grounds, Lily slowly regained consciousness, her head throbbing and her wrists bound tightly with rope that bit uncomfortably into her skin. She blinked against the dim firelight, taking stock of her surroundings with the same careful, analytical mind she had always applied to her healing work, cataloging details that might prove useful later. 3 visible captors, a small clearing, surrounded by dense forest, no obvious path of escape without alerting her guards. "Ah, she wakes," a voice said, and Lily turned to find a well-dressed man approaching from the shadows beyond the firelight, his expression carrying none of the crude menace of the mercenaries, but something far more calculating and dangerous. This, she realized with growing dread, was no simple hired thug, but someone with genuine political ambition behind his actions. "Who are you?" Lily demanded, refusing to let the fear coursing through her veins show in her voice. "My name is of little consequence to you," the man replied smoothly, crouching down to study her with cold, assessing eyes. "What matters is what your capture will accomplish. Your king has built his entire reputation on being unbreakable, untouchable, a ruler who fears nothing and no one. I intend to demonstrate, quite thoroughly, just how wrong that reputation truly is." Lily's mind raced, piecing together fragments of information from the tense conversations she had overheard between Damien and Kale over recent weeks. "Ashford," she said slowly, watching his expression for confirmation. "Lord Callum Ashford." Something flickered across the man's face, brief surprise quickly smoothed into cold amusement. "Clever girl. Yes, though knowing my name will do you little good in your current situation." "Whatever you hope to gain from this," Lily said, forcing steady confidence into her voice despite her racing heart, "you will find that hurting me accomplishes nothing beyond ensuring the complete destruction of everything you value. Damien will not stop until every person responsible for this has been found." "That," Ashford said, a cruel smile spreading across his face, "is rather precisely the point. A grieving, enraged king makes catastrophic mistakes, and a kingdom destabilized by its ruler's reckless vengeance becomes remarkably easy to reshape to one's own advantage." Lily felt cold dread settle deep in her stomach as the full scope of Ashford's plan became clear. Not simply an attempt to harm her directly, but a calculated effort to use her as bait, to draw Damien into some kind of trap that would either destroy him outright or so thoroughly compromise his judgment that Blackwood itself would become vulnerable to exploitation. She thought of Damien's face the last time they had spoken, the vulnerable admission of love that had finally broken through years of careful emotional control, and she understood, with sudden clarity, that whatever came next would test not only her own courage, but the very foundation of whatever future they had begun building together. Somewhere beyond the dense trees surrounding this hidden camp, she could sense it, faintly but unmistakably, through the bond that connected them regardless of distance. Damien was coming for her, driven by a fury and desperation that would make him more dangerous than Callum Ashford had ever anticipated, and Lily found herself praying, as the firelight flickered against the darkening forest, that his fury would not lead him directly into whatever trap had been so carefully prepared for his arrival. Ashford watched Lily carefully throughout the following hours, clearly expecting tears, pleading, some outward sign of the fear he had so deliberately tried to instill in her. Instead, Lily forced her mind toward practical assessment, cataloging every detail of the camp, every weakness in her captor's organization, every possible opportunity that might present itself as the night wore on. The rope binding her wrists, she noted, had been tied by someone more accustomed to restraining prisoners than actual healers, leaving enough give that careful, patient movement might eventually loosen the knots. Her captors, though clearly skilled fighters, seemed to underestimate her entirely, dismissing her as helpless simply because she lacked their obvious physical strength. "You seem remarkably calm for someone in your position," Ashford observed, settling onto a fallen log near the fire, his earlier cold amusement giving way to genuine curiosity. "Panic rarely solves problems," Lily replied evenly, continuing her subtle, careful work against her bindings, even as she maintained steady eye contact with her captor. "I find it more useful to think clearly." "An admirable philosophy," Ashford said, though there was an edge of mockery beneath his words. "Though I suspect clear thinking will do little good once your king arrives. He will not be thinking clearly at all, I imagine. Grief and rage tend to override strategy rather thoroughly." Lily kept her expression carefully neutral, though internally, she felt a flare of fierce protective worry for Damien. She knew, better than perhaps anyone else in the kingdom, how deeply his controlled exterior masked genuine vulnerability, how much this bond had already reshaped the careful walls he had built around himself. Ashford's plan, she realized with growing clarity, depended entirely on exploiting that vulnerability, on using Damien's love for her as a weapon against his own judgment. She needed to find a way out before that trap could be sprung. As the hours passed, and her captors grew increasingly relaxed, confident in the remote location of their camp and the effectiveness of their bindings, Lily continued her patient, methodical work, finally feeling the rope around her wrists loosen enough to slip free during a moment when her captor's attention was drawn toward a distant sound in the forest, likely nothing more than a nighttime animal, but enough to briefly distract their vigilance. She did not act immediately, understanding that a failed escape attempt would only result in tighter restraints and heightened suspicion. Instead, she waited, watching, gathering information about patrol patterns and camp layout that might prove useful when the right opportunity finally presented itself. That opportunity arrived faster than she anticipated. A commotion erupted at the edge of the camp, one of the mercenary guards rushing toward Ashford with obvious alarm. "Search parties," the man reported urgently. "Blackwood forces are moving through the forest, closer than we anticipated. Someone must have picked up our trail faster than expected." Ashford's composed expression flickered with genuine concern for the first time since Lily's capture. "How close?" "Perhaps 2 miles, moving quickly. Their king is leading the search personally, and he is—" The mercenary hesitated, clearly uncertain how to describe what he had apparently witnessed. "He is not moving like a man in control of himself. He tore through our first perimeter marker, like it was nothing." A flicker of something that might have been fear crossed Ashford's face before he quickly masked it with renewed calculation. "Good," he said, though his voice carried less confidence than his words suggested. "Let him come. An uncontrolled king makes exactly the kind of mistakes we need." But Lily, watching this exchange carefully, sensed genuine uncertainty beneath Ashford's forced confidence, and she recognized, with a surge of fierce hope, that this moment of distraction and reorganization might be exactly the opportunity she had been waiting for. As Ashford turned to issue new orders to his remaining guards, redirecting several toward reinforcing the camp's perimeter against the approaching search party, Lily slipped her hands free of the loosened rope entirely and moved with careful, silent purpose toward the edge of the clearing, away from the fire's revealing light. Her heart pounded as she navigated through the darkness, every snap of a twig beneath her feet sounding thunderous in her own ears, but her captors remained focused on the approaching threat from Blackwood's forces, giving her precious, unwatched moments to put distance between herself and the camp. She had not traveled far, perhaps only a few hundred yards through dense underbrush, when a massive black shape crashed through the trees directly ahead of her, and for one terrifying moment, Lily froze, uncertain whether this represented rescue or further danger. Then she caught the scent, achingly familiar even in wolf form, and relief crashed through her so powerfully that her knees nearly buckled. Damien shifted back to human form the instant he recognized her, closing the remaining distance between them in 3 long strides before pulling her into an embrace so fierce it nearly stole the breath from her lungs. "You are alive," he said, his voice breaking with an emotion so raw and unguarded that Lily felt tears spring to her own eyes in response. "I felt the bond. I knew you were still breathing, but I could not be certain. I could not." "I am here," Lily said, holding on to him just as tightly, allowing herself a single moment of pure relief before the practical urgency of their situation reasserted itself. "Damien, this is a trap. Ashford wants you to lose control, to make mistakes driven by rage. His men are reinforcing the camp perimeter right now, expecting you to charge in blindly." Damien pulled back slightly, studying her face with an intensity that suggested he was recalibrating his entire approach based on her warning. The wild, uncontrolled fury that had driven him through the forest for the past several hours visibly settled into something colder, more calculated, though no less dangerous for its returned control. "You escaped on your own," he said, something like awe entering his voice despite the tension of their circumstances. "I had considerable motivation," Lily replied, managing a small, exhausted smile despite everything. "Now, can we discuss strategy instead of simply charging back in there? Ashford has perhaps 6 mercenaries remaining, positioned to intercept a frontal assault." Cale arrived moments later, along with a contingent of Blackwood's most experienced warriors, and Lily quickly relayed everything she had observed during her captivity: the camp's layout, the number and positioning of remaining guards, Ashford's apparent uncertainty despite his outward confidence. Damien listened with focused intensity, the strategic mind that had guided Blackwood through years of conflict, reasserting itself now that Lily's safety had been confirmed. "We approach from 2 directions," Damien said finally, addressing Cale and the assembled warriors. "Quiet, coordinated, no reckless charging into obvious traps. Ashford wanted a grieving, uncontrolled king. He is about to discover precisely how dangerous a calm, calculated one can be instead." As the warriors moved into position under Cale's careful direction, Damien turned back to Lily, his expression softening despite the tension of the coming confrontation. "You should return to safety with the rear guard," he said, though there was less command in his voice than genuine concern. "I am not leaving," Lily said firmly, her earlier fear giving way to fierce, protective determination. "I know this camp better than anyone here, besides Ashford's own men. I can help." Damien studied her for a long moment, torn between his instinct to shield her from further danger and his growing recognition that Lily was not someone who could simply be protected from the edges of every difficult situation, that her strength and insight had already proven invaluable in ways he had not anticipated. "Stay close to me," he finally said, "and follow every instruction precisely. I cannot lose you again tonight." "You will not," Lily promised, though even as she spoke the words, she understood that the coming confrontation with Ashford would test that promise more severely than either of them could yet fully anticipate, as Blackwood's forces began their careful, silent advance back toward the camp, where a desperate, cornered enemy waited, still confident that his carefully laid trap would deliver exactly the chaos and vengeance he had spent weeks planning to exploit. The camp fell silent faster than Ashford expected, an unnatural quiet settling over the surrounding forest that made the hairs on the back of his neck rise with growing unease. His mercenaries, positioned at the perimeter to intercept an anticipated reckless charge, reported no sign of the search party they had been tracking only minutes earlier. "Where did they go?" Ashford demanded, pacing anxiously near the fire, his earlier confidence crumbling under the weight of uncertainty. He had planned for a furious, uncontrolled king crashing through the trees in a blind rage, not this unsettling, calculated silence. "Perhaps they lost the trail," one of his remaining guards suggested, though his tone carried little genuine conviction. Ashford did not believe it for a moment. He had underestimated something, he realized with growing dread, though he could not yet determine exactly what. The girl's escape, he now understood, had been more than a simple failure of vigilance. It had likely given the Alpha King information that had shifted his entire approach. He was still turning this realization over in his mind when the first mercenary at the northern perimeter went down, without so much as a cry of alarm, Kale's blade finding its mark with silent, professional efficiency before the man could raise any warning. The attack, when it finally came, arrived not as the explosive, reckless assault Ashford had prepared for, but as a coordinated, methodical dismantling of his remaining forces, warriors moving through the darkness with the kind of discipline that spoke of genuine strategic command rather than blind fury. Within minutes, half his mercenaries had been neutralized, and Ashford felt the carefully constructed foundation of his plan crumbling apart entirely. "Ashford!" Damien's voice cut through the clearing, carrying an authority that made even the most hardened remaining mercenaries hesitate. He stepped into the firelight with Lily positioned safely behind him, flanked by Kale and several of Blackwood's most trusted warriors, his expression carrying none of the wild fury Ashford had anticipated, replaced instead by a cold, focused determination that proved far more unsettling. "You were supposed to be consumed by rage," Ashford said, unable to fully mask the alarm creeping into his voice as he backed slowly toward the remaining cover of the trees. "Blinded by grief, making reckless decisions that would destabilize your entire kingdom." "You mistook love for weakness," Damien replied, his voice carrying a quiet, dangerous edge. Lily did not simply wait to be rescued. She freed herself, gathered crucial information, and helped devise the very strategy that just dismantled your entire operation. You built your plan around a fundamental misunderstanding of what makes someone truly strong. Ashford's remaining guards, recognizing the hopelessness of their position, began dropping their weapons one by one, unwilling to continue fighting for a cause that had so clearly collapsed around them. Ashford himself made a desperate lunge toward the tree line, apparently hoping to escape into the darkness before Blackwood's forces could fully surround him. He did not make it 3 steps before Damien's wolf intercepted him, a massive black shape moving with terrifying speed that left no possibility of escape. Ashford found himself pinned to the forest floor, Damien's golden eyes, now shifted back to human form, staring down at him with cold, unforgiving judgment. "You threatened my mate," Damien said, his voice low and controlled, despite the fury still simmering beneath every word. "You conspired to destabilize my kingdom through violence against an innocent woman who has done nothing but bring genuine kindness to everyone she encounters. I could end your life here in this clearing, and no one would question the justice of it." Lily, watching from a careful distance, felt her heart pound with a complicated mixture of relief and lingering fear as she witnessed the true depth of danger Damien represented when fully unleashed. This was the ruthless king the stories had always described, the man capable of the violence his reputation demanded, and yet, even now, she could see him holding himself back from the killing blow that would have been so easy, so understandable, given everything Ashford had done. "Damien," she said quietly, stepping forward despite Kale's cautionary hand on her arm. Damien's attention shifted toward her immediately, the murderous focus in his eyes softening slightly, though the tension in his body remained coiled and dangerous. "He deserves justice," Lily said carefully, understanding the delicate balance of the moment, but justice through proper judgment, not through vengeance taken in the heat of this confrontation. Let him answer for his crimes before your council, publicly, so that every noble who might consider similar schemes understands precisely what awaits them." For a long moment, Damien remained still, visibly wrestling with the primal urge for immediate retribution against everything and everyone who had endangered his mate. Then, slowly, he released his grip on Ashford, stepping back while Kale moved forward to properly restrain the defeated conspirator. "You are fortunate," Damien said to Ashford, his voice carrying icy control once more, "that my mate possesses more mercy than I do. Believe me when I say that mercy will not extend to your formal judgment before Blackwood's council." Ashford, understanding the true precariousness of his situation, said nothing further as Kale's warriors led him away in restraints, his carefully constructed plan for chaos and destabilization having collapsed entirely into humiliating defeat. As the remaining mercenaries were similarly secured, and the clearing gradually emptied of the chaos that had consumed it only minutes earlier, Damien turned back to Lily, the last vestiges of controlled fury finally giving way to overwhelming relief and exhaustion. "You saved yourself tonight," he said quietly, reaching out to gently cup her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away traces of dirt and dried tears she had not even realized still marked her cheeks. "And then you saved me from making a mistake that would have haunted us both." "We saved each other," Lily corrected softly, leaning into his touch. "That is what partnership means, Damien. Neither of us facing danger completely alone." Damien pulled her into an embrace that spoke of everything words could not fully capture: the terror of nearly losing her, the fierce pride in her courage and resourcefulness, the overwhelming relief that the danger, at least for now, had finally passed. Lily held onto him just as tightly, allowing herself, finally, to fully feel the fear and exhaustion of the entire ordeal, now that safety had been restored. "Take me home," she whispered against his chest, and though she had only lived within Blackwood's walls for a matter of weeks, the word home felt entirely natural now, entirely earned. "Always," Damien promised, and as they made their way back through the moonlit forest toward Blackwood's distant towers, surrounded by loyal warriors who had witnessed, perhaps for the first time, the true depth of what their formidable king was willing to sacrifice for the woman who had somehow, against every expectation, become his greatest strength rather than his weakness. The journey back to the fortress passed in exhausted, grateful silence, Lily resting against Damien's side as they rode together, the adrenaline of the confrontation slowly giving way to bone-deep weariness. By the time Blackwood's familiar walls came into view, painted silver in the early moonlight, both of them understood that tonight had changed something fundamental between them, not simply confirming the strength of their bond, but proving, beyond any doubt, that whatever challenges the future might bring, they would face them together, as true partners rather than a powerful king and his vulnerable mate. Behind them, in the fortress dungeons, Callum Ashford awaited his formal judgment, his carefully constructed plans for chaos having accomplished nothing beyond revealing, to the entire kingdom, exactly how deep and unshakable the bond between their ruthless Alpha King and his fierce, gentle healer truly ran. Callum Ashford's public trial before Blackwood's full council took place 3 days after his capture, held in the same great hall where Lily had first arrived as a stranger to court, uncertain of her place within these intimidating walls. Now, she stood beside Damien's throne as his acknowledged mate, watching as evidence of Ashford's conspiracy was presented before assembled nobles from across the kingdom. Lady Vivian's involvement had come to light during the investigation as well, her careful information gathering on Lily's habits and schedule, ultimately traced back through Ashford's own testimony, offered in a desperate attempt to lessen his own punishment by implicating his co-conspirator. She was stripped of her noble standing and exiled from Blackwood territory entirely, a punishment that, while severe, reflected mercy compared to what her actual involvement in the plot might have warranted under harsher judgment. Ashford himself received the full weight of Blackwood's justice, his execution carried out publicly as a clear message to any who might consider similar schemes against the kingdom's stability. It was not a pleasant spectacle, and Lily found herself grateful that Damien had, at her earlier request, chosen proper judgment over the immediate vengeance his instincts had originally demanded. There was a difference, she had come to understand, between necessary justice and unchecked cruelty, and watching Damien navigate that distinction with genuine care, rather than his old reputation for ruthless efficiency alone, told her more about the man he was becoming than any declaration of love ever could. In the weeks following the trial, Blackwood settled into a period of relative peace, the immediate threat neutralized, and the court, having witnessed firsthand the lengths to which their king would go to protect his mate, finally beginning to genuinely embrace Lily's place among them, rather than merely tolerating her presence out of obligation to Damien's authority. The servants, who had long ago taken to calling her the Gentle Storm, found their affection for her only deepening following the ordeal. Stories of her calm resourcefulness during captivity, spreading through the fortress with the same enthusiasm that had once carried tales of her sharp temper during her first confrontation with Lady Vivian. Even the most skeptical nobles, who had initially questioned whether a humble healer possessed the strength necessary to stand beside their formidable king, found themselves reconsidering their judgments in light of everything Lily had proven during the crisis. Cale, perhaps more than anyone beyond Damien himself, had witnessed the full transformation that had taken place within his king over the preceding months, and he found himself genuinely moved by the changes, both in Damien's willingness to temper ruthless efficiency with genuine compassion, and in the obvious joy that had returned to a man who had spent years burying every emotion beneath duty and calculated control. "You are different," Cale observed one evening, as they reviewed routine border reports together, a task that had long ago lost the tension it once carried during the height of the crisis. Lighter, somehow, despite everything that happened. "I found something worth protecting beyond simply the kingdom itself," Damien replied, and there was no hesitation in the admission. None of the careful guardedness that had once characterized every conversation about his personal feelings. "Lily taught me that strength and vulnerability are not opposing forces, that allowing myself to genuinely care for someone does not weaken my ability to rule effectively. If anything, it has made me a better king than fear and calculation alone ever could." It was against this backdrop of restored peace and genuine transformation that Damien finally approached Lily, several weeks after the trial's conclusion, with a question that both of them had known was coming, though neither had rushed toward its arrival. He found her in the garden, tending to a small collection of herbs she had personally cultivated since her arrival, a quiet corner of the fortress grounds that had become entirely her own over the preceding months. She looked up as he approached, offering the warm smile that had, somewhere along their journey together, become as essential to his daily existence as breathing itself. "You have that expression again," Lily said, setting aside her gardening tools with obvious curiosity. "The one you get when you are working up to something important." "Am I truly that transparent?" Damien asked, a faint smile tugging at his lips despite the nervousness evident in his posture. "Only to me," Lily replied, standing to face him fully. Damien took a steadying breath, and for a moment, Lily glimpsed the same vulnerability she had first witnessed during their initial meeting months ago, when the terrifying Alpha King had stood before her, equally stunned by the sudden, overwhelming force of their bond. "I have ruled this kingdom for 6 years, believing that strength meant standing entirely alone," he said, taking her hands gently in his own. "You have shown me, through everything we have faced together, that true strength comes from choosing to stand beside someone, from trusting them enough to share both the burdens and the joys of this life. I do not wish to simply have you as my mate any longer, Lily. I wish to formally claim you as my queen, before this entire kingdom, so that everyone understands exactly what you have already proven through your courage and your unwavering kindness, that you are not merely someone I fear losing, but someone this entire kingdom needs beside its throne." Lily felt tears gather in her eyes, though they carried none of the fear or uncertainty that had once accompanied her arrival at Blackwood. "Yes," she said simply, the word carrying the weight of everything they had endured together, every challenge overcome, every wall carefully dismantled through patient honesty and genuine love. "I will be your queen, Damien, not because a bond forced this choice upon either of us, but because I choose you, entirely and freely, exactly as you are." The formal coronation took place 3 weeks later, the great hall transformed with autumn flowers and warm candlelight. Every corner of Blackwood's court gathered to witness the moment their feared, ruthless king formally claimed the small healer who had somehow reshaped his entire understanding of strength and leadership. Elena stood proudly among the witnesses, having decided to remain permanently at Blackwood following the crisis, finding her own place among the fortress's healing staff. Even Harold had traveled from Hartwell for the occasion, his earlier reservations about his daughter's path having given way entirely to proud acceptance of the remarkable woman she had become. As Damien placed the crown upon Lily's head, formally declaring her Queen of Blackwood before the assembled court, he leaned close enough that only she could hear his final words of the ceremony. "I feared nothing in this world," he murmured, "until I discovered exactly what it meant to nearly lose you. Now, I fear only ever taking your presence beside me for granted." "You never will," Lily replied softly, her own crown catching the warm candlelight as she smiled up at the man who had once been nothing more than a terrifying rumor to her, and who had become, through months of patient honesty and shared courage, the truest partner she could have ever imagined. The court erupted into celebration as the ceremony concluded, servants and nobles alike raising their voices in genuine joy rather than the careful, fearful compliance that had once characterized every gathering within these walls. Blackwood Kingdom, forged through years of ruthless necessity and hard-won survival, had finally found something its previous rule had always lacked: a queen whose gentle strength perfectly balanced her king's formidable power, and a partnership built not on fear or political convenience, but on the rare, precious foundation of genuine, unshakable love. Outside the fortress walls, as evening settled over the kingdom and the first stars began appearing in the clear autumn sky, the wolves of Blackwood's surrounding forests lifted their voices in a chorus of howls, an ancient tradition marking the joining of a true fated pair. Somewhere within the great hall, wrapped in the warmth of celebration, and finally, completely at peace, Damian Cross, once known throughout the region only as the Butcher King who feared nothing, held his new queen close and understood, with absolute certainty, that he had found something infinitely more valuable than the fearsome reputation that had once defined his entire existence, a partner who matched his strength with her own unshakable spirit, and a love that no enemy, no conspiracy, and no ancient rumor of ruthlessness could ever hope to diminish.